I didn't expect you. Life rarely warns us before it changes. It doesn't knock politely or explain its reasons. Sometimes it just places someone or something right in front of us when we're tired, guarded, and no longer asking. I was busy surviving, carrying my past like a silent weight, telling myself I didn't need anything more. And then you arrived, not as a miracle, not as a promise, but as a presence that felt honest, calm, and real. This isn't a story about destiny shouting from the sky. It's about the quiet moments that save us, the unexpected connections that remind us who we are when we've forgotten, the people who don't fix us, but sit with us while we heal. I didn't expect you, but somehow I needed you. I didn't expect you because I'd stopped expecting anything at all. Expectations are dangerous when you've been disappointed enough times. They teach you to build walls quietly, brick by brick, until even hope has to knock before entering. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I didn't need anything more than what I already had, even if what I had was mostly silence and routine. I learned how to move through days without asking questions, without looking too closely at what was missing. There's a strange comfort in emotional survival. You wake up, you do what you must, you sleep, and you repeat. You convince yourself that this is strength, that independence means never needing anyone, never opening a door you might have to close again. I didn't expect you because I wasn't looking. I had trained my eyes to look down, my heart to stay guarded. When you've carried disappointment long enough, you stop waiting for rescue. You stop believing in timing. You stop trusting moments that feel gentle. You tell yourself that anything good must be temporary and anything meaningful will eventually ask for a price you're too tired to pay. So you settle, not loudly, quietly. You settle into a version of life that doesn't hurt too much, but doesn't ask you to feel too deeply either. It's a safe distance from joy and pain, and you learn how to exist there. Then you arrive, not with noise, not with promises, not with answers. You arrived like a pause, like a breath I didn't realize I was holding. There was no dramatic entrance, no instant clarity, just a subtle shift, conversations that didn't feel forced, silence that didn't feel awkward, a presence that didn't demand explanations. And that's what confused me the most. You didn't try to fix me. You didn't ask me to be more or less than I was. You didn't rush me into becoming someone else. You simply stayed. And sometimes staying is the bravest thing anyone can do. I didn't expect you because my past had taught me patterns. It had taught me how things usually go, how people arrive full of energy and leave full of excuses, how connection can feel intense but disappear quietly, how trust, once broken, teaches your body to flinch even before your mind understands why. I thought I knew the rules. I thought I understood how attachment ends. I had memorized the exits. I had practiced emotional detachment like a skill. I thought that made me prepared. What I didn't expect was how unfamiliar peace would feel. You didn't bring chaos. You didn't bring confusion. You didn't bring a storm. You brought something slower, something steadier, and that terrified me. Because chaos is loud, but peace asks you to listen. Chaos gives you distractions. Peace gives you mirrors. And when you're not used to calm, you start questioning it. You wonder when it will end. You wait for the moment it changes its mind. You brace yourself for the drop even when nothing is falling. I didn't expect you, but I needed what you represented. Not perfection, not romance, not salvation. I needed a reminder that connection doesn't always arrive to take something from you. Sometimes it arrives to return something you lost along the way, like your ability to feel safe being quiet, like your permission to rest without guilt, like the courage to be honest without rehearsing every word. You made space, and in that space, parts of me started breathing again. I didn't realize how tired I was until I stopped needing to perform. I didn't realize how guarded I had become until I noticed I wasn't guarding myself around you. There's a difference between being alone and being at peace with yourself. I had learned how to be alone. I hadn't learned how to be open without fear. And you didn't teach me that by instruction. You taught me by example, by consistency, by showing up the same way on quiet days as you did on heavy ones. I didn't expect you because I thought needing someone meant weakness. I thought dependence was something to avoid. I thought strength meant carrying everything alone and never letting it show. But what I needed wasn't someone to carry me. I needed someone who could walk beside me without rushing, without pulling, without asking me to be someone I wasn't ready to be. I needed a presence that didn't demand my energy but respected my pace. There's a moment when you realize that what you've been calling independence was actually self-protection. that what you've been calling strength was actually endurance. And endurance keeps you alive, but it doesn't always let you live. You showed me that needing someone doesn't mean losing yourself. Sometimes it means finally being seen without armor. Sometimes it means allowing support without surrendering dignity. I didn't expect you, but I needed the way you listened. Not to respond, not to correct, not to solve, but to understand. I needed the way you didn't rush silence, didn't interrupt pauses, didn't fill every space with words, because silence can be heavy when you're alone, but it becomes lighter when it's shared. You reminded me that connection doesn't have to be loud to be real, it just has to be honest. I needed the reminder that healing doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like unlearning habits that once kept you safe but now keep you distant. Sometimes it looks like trusting small moments before believing in big ones. And you were patient with that. You didn't demand a version of me that was already healed. You accepted the version that was still learning how to put itself back together. I didn't expect you to matter this much. I didn't expect your presence to shift the way I see myself. But when someone meets you without judgment, without pressure, without expectations, you start to question the stories you've been telling yourself. You start to wonder if maybe you were never too much, never too quiet, never too distant. Maybe you were just waiting for the right environment to be yourself without apology. I didn't expect you, but I needed the way you stayed when things were simple, not just when they were exciting. I needed the proof that connection isn't built in grand moments alone, but in consistency, in patience, in choosing presence again and again, even when there's nothing dramatic happening. Because real connection isn't about intensity, it's about endurance. Not the kind that exhausts you, but the kind that supports you when you're no longer trying to impress anyone. I didn't expect you to change my understanding of need. I thought need meant lack. I thought it meant weakness. But what I needed was not something to fill an empty space. What I needed was recognition, a mirror that reflected me without distortion, a reminder that I didn't have to disappear to be accepted, that I didn't have to earn peace by suffering first, and somewhere in that quiet realization, without announcements, without declarations, without promises about tomorrow, I understood that some things enter your life not to stay forever, not to define you, not to rescue you, but to remind you of what you're capable of feeling again, to show you that your heart still knows how to open, that your soul still recognizes gentleness, that your life can hold meaning without noise, without force, without fury. Didn't realize how much energy I was spending resisting change, until I noticed how tired I felt all the time. Resistance can look like control, it can look like logic, it can look like telling yourself you're being careful, when really you're just afraid of being disappointed again. I had become very good at predicting outcomes. If something felt unfamiliar, I already knew how it would end. If something felt good, I assumed it wouldn't last. That way I stayed ahead of the pain, or at least I thought I did. Change doesn't always arrive violently. Sometimes it arrives quietly, asking for permission instead of forcing its way in. And that's the kind that scares us the most. Because we don't know how to fight it. We only know how to fight what looks like danger. We don't know how to respond when something asks us to soften instead of harden. I had built my identity around holding things together, around not needing help, around staying in control of my emotional space. Letting something new in meant risking the balance I had carefully constructed. I used to believe that receiving meant owing, that if I accepted care, understanding, or patience, I would eventually have to pay for it with loss. So I learned to reject things before they could become important. I learned to keep one foot out the door. It felt responsible, it felt mature, it felt safe. But safety built entirely on avoidance slowly turns into isolation. And isolation has a way of convincing you that this is all there is. Learning to receive didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a decision. It was uncomfortable. It felt unnatural. It meant sitting with the urge to pull away and choosing not to. It meant noticing when my instincts told me to retreat and asking myself where those instincts came from. Most of them weren't coming from the present moment. They were echoes from earlier versions of me who had learned their lessons the hard way. There's a strange vulnerability in allowing something good to stay. Pain announces itself. Loss makes noise. But goodness asks you to be open without guarantees. It asks you to trust without evidence. It asks you to show up without armor. And when you've spent years protecting yourself, that feels like stepping into the cold without a coat. You don't know how long you'll have to stand there. You just know you can't keep living wrapped in layers forever. I noticed how often I tried to earn what tea was freely given, how I felt uncomfortable when kindness wasn't followed by conditions, how my mind searched for the hidden cost, the fine print, the moment when the tone would change. Receiving meant admitting that I didn't have to struggle all the time to deserve peace. And that idea challenged everything I thought I knew about strength. Strength, I had learned, was about endurance, about pushing through, about not needing rest. But receiving taught me a different definition. It taught me that strength can be quiet, that it can look like listening instead of proving, that it can look like allowing someone to see you without explaining yourself, that it can look like trusting, that not everything that enters your life is there to take something away. Change asked me to loosen my grip on the version of myself that survived by control. That version did its job. It kept me moving forward when stopping would have been dangerous. But there comes a point when survival strategies start limiting growth, when what once protected you begins to imprison you. Receiving meant honoring who I was without letting that version decide who I would always be. There's fear in change because it requires presence. You can't receive while hiding in the future or the past. You have to be where you are. And being present means feeling things as they happen, not after you've analyzed them, not after you've prepared for the worst. It means letting moments touch you before you've decided how you'll lane them away. That level of awareness can feel overwhelming when you're not used to it. I had to learn that receiving doesn't mean losing autonomy. It doesn't mean becoming dependent or weak. It means recognizing that connection is not a transaction, that not everything needs to be balanced, measured, or repaid immediately. Some things exist simply to be experienced, and resisting them doesn't make you safer. It just makes you lonelier. Change often asks us to release certainty, to admit we don't know how this will unfold. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for anyone who has been hurt before, but certainty built on fear keeps you locked in familiar pain. Receiving asks you to choose a different discomfort, the discomfort of growth, the discomfort of openness, the discomfort of allowing life to surprise you again. I noticed that the more I allowed myself to receive, the quieter my internal noise became. The constant calculations, the emotional budgeting, the preparation for disappointment, they began to soften, not disappear, but loosen their grip. I wasn't suddenly fearless, I was simply less ruled by fear. There's a difference. Receiving also meant forgiving myself for the times I pushed things away, for the moments I mistook distance for wisdom. I wasn't broken, I was adapting, and now I was learning a new way to exist, one that didn't require constant defense, one that allowed for warmth without suspicion. Change doesn't ask you to forget who you were, it asks you to trust who you're becoming. And that trust is built slowly, through small acts of openness, through choosing not to close off when something feels unfamiliar, through allowing moments to be what they are instead of what you fear they might become. I learned that receiving is not passive. It's an active choice. It requires awareness. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to be affected by life again. And being affected means being changed. There's no way around that. But resisting change doesn't stop it. It only delays the moment you realize that you've been standing still while life was quietly waiting for you to step forward. I didn't stop resisting change because it became easy. I stopped because I realized that holding on was costing me more than letting go, that the effort to remain untouched was heavier than the risk of being moved, that the walls I built to keep pain out were also keeping meaning away. And learning to receive was not about surrendering control completely, but about choosing where control was no longer necessary, about trusting that not every open door leads to loss, about allowing myself to be present for the moments that arrive without warning and offer something real. I used to believe healing was something you achieved, like a finish line, like a moment where everything suddenly made sense and nothing hurt anymore. I thought healing meant fixing what was broken, correcting what went wrong, becoming someone untouched by the past. And because I couldn't reach that version of myself, I assumed I was failing. I assumed I was behind. I assumed there was something wrong with the way I was moving through life. What I didn't understand was that healing doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being present, from staying when it would be easier to disappear, from allowing yourself to be seen in the middle of the process, not at the end of it. Presence doesn't demand answers. It doesn't rush progress. It simply asks you to remain honest with where you are, I had spent a long time trying to heal alone, not because I preferred it, but because I didn't trust anyone to witness the unfinished parts of me. I thought I needed to clean up my pain before letting anyone close. I thought vulnerability was something you earned after you were strong enough. But pain doesn't dissolve in isolation, it echoes there. It repeats itself. It grows louder when there's no one to sit beside it. Presence changed that. Not presence as advice or solutions, but presence as quiet companionship. The kind that doesn't interrupt your thoughts. The kind that doesn't rush you toward optimism. The kind that doesn't need you to explain why some days feel heavier than others. Just someone staying, just someone listening, just someone choosing not to look away. There's something disarming about being allowed to exist without performing strength. When no one is asking you to be inspirational, resilient, or positive. When you're not expected to turn your pain into a lesson on demand. That space creates safety, and safety is where healing actually begins. Not when you're pushed to be better, but when you're allowed to be honest. I realized that perfection had always been a barrier. It kept me striving instead of feeling. It kept me focused on outcomes instead of experiences. It taught me to judge my emotions instead of understanding them. Presence asked me to stop evaluating myself and start noticing myself. To sit with discomfort without labeling it as failure. To acknowledge pain without trying to immediately justify or escape it. Healing through presence meant allowing emotions to move at their own pace. Not forcing closure, not demanding clarity. Some things don't resolve neatly. Some wounds don't disappear. They soften, they change shape. They lose their power to control you, but they don't vanish completely. And that's not weakness, that's reality. I learned that being present with someone doesn't mean fixing them. It means trusting their process. It means respecting their timing. It means understanding that support is not about control, but about consistency. Showing up the same way even when there's nothing to celebrate. Even when progress is invisible. Even when the only thing happening is endurance. There's a kind of healing that happens when someone stays calm in your chaos. When they don't panic at your uncertainty. When they don't withdraw when you struggle to articulate what you're feeling. That steadiness teaches your nervous system something new. It teaches you that connection doesn't always lead to abandonment, that being honest doesn't always lead to rejection. Presence also taught me to be gentler with myself, to stop demanding constant growth, to stop measuring my worth by how well I was coping. Some days, presence looked like rest. Some days, it looked like silence. Some days, it looked like admitting I didn't have the energy to be strong. And instead of seeing those moments as setbacks, I began to see them as necessary pauses. Perfection isolates. Presence connects. Perfection keeps you performing. Presence allows you to breathe. And when you can breathe, your body starts to release what it's been holding. Healing is not just mental, it's physical. It lives in the shoulders you keep tense, in the jaw you clench, in the way you brace yourself for conversations that haven't even happened yet. Presence loosens that grip. I stopped asking myself when I would be healed and started asking myself if I was being honest. Honest about my limits, honest about my needs, honest about what still hurt. And in that honesty, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly. The way real change usual. Why happens. Healing through presence meant accepting that I didn't need to become someone else to deserve peace. I didn't need to erase my past. I didn't need to prove resilience. I needed to allow myself to be human without apology, to let connection exist without conditions, to trust that I could be both healing and whole at the same time. There's strength in staying present with pain without letting it define you, in acknowledging wounds without turning them into identity. Presence doesn't glorify suffering, but it doesn't deny it either. It gives it space to move through you instead of getting stuck inside you. I learned that perfection is rigid, but presence is flexible. Perfection breaks under pressure, presence adapts. It allows for bad days without turning them into permanent conclusions. It allows for setbacks without rewriting your entire story. It allows you to remain connected to yourself even when things feel unclear. Healing didn't come from becoming flawless. It came from allowing myself to be accompanied while imperfect, from realizing that I didn't need to be fixed to be worthy of care, from understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing someone can offer you is not advice, not solutions, not reassurance, but their steady attention, their willingness to sit in the moment with you exactly as you are, without trying to change the shape of your experience, without asking you to hurry, without expecting you to be anything other than Presenti used to think be. Becoming someone new meant leaving parts of myself behind. like growth required erasure. Like maturity demanded that I outgrow who I was and pretend that version no longer existed. I thought change was a kind of betrayal, that if I evolved too much, I would lose the authenticity of my earlier self. So I held on tightly to old identities, old habits, old narratives, even when they no longer fit the life I was living. What I didn't understand was that identity isn't something you replace, it's something you expand. You don't become new by deleting the past, you become new by integrating it, by carrying forward what still matters and gently releasing what no longer serves you. Growth doesn't ask you to deny where you came from. It asks you to honor it without letting it control where you're going. There were versions of me that existed purely to survive. They learned how to stay quiet, how to stay strong, how to stay unnoticed. Those versions weren't weak, they were necessary. They showed up when they had to. They protected me when protection was the priority. But survival is not the same as living. And there comes a time when the tools you use to survive begin to limit your ability to fully exist. Becoming someone new felt uncomfortable because it required me to loosen my loyalty to pain. Pain can become familiar. It can become a reference point. You start to define yourself by what you've endured instead of what you're becoming. Letting go of that identity feels like stepping into uncertainty without a map. You wonder who you are without the struggle, without the defense mechanisms, without the constant vigilance. I learned that keeping who I was doesn't mean repeating old patterns. It means preserving my values, my sensitivity, my capacity for depth, my awareness of how easily people can be hurt. Those qualities didn't disappear as I changed. They matured. They became less reactive and more intentional, less defensive and more discerning. There's fear in becoming someone new because it changes how people relate to you. Some will only recognize the old version. Some will resist your growth because it reminds them of their own stagnation, and some will quietly drift away because you no longer fit the role they assigned you. That loss can feel personal, but growth is not a rejection of others. It's an acceptance of yourself. I had to learn the difference between losing myself and shedding layers. Losing yourself feels empty. Shedding layers feels lighter. Losing yourself creates confusion. Shedding layers creates clarity. The process is subtle, and it takes honesty to recognize which one you're experiencing. I realized that I wasn't disappearing, I was becoming more aligned. Becoming someone new also meant taking responsibility for who I was becoming. Not blaming my past for every limitation, not using old wounds as excuses, understanding that while I didn't choose everything that happened to me, I did have a choice in how I carried it forward. Growth. H required accountability without self-punishment, awareness without shame. I stopped trying to impress the past version of myself. I stopped asking whether the old me would approve. That version did what it could with what it knew. This version knows different things. And honoring both meant allowing evolution without guilt. It meant recognizing that growth is not disloyalty, it's continuation. There were moments when I felt unfamiliar to myself, when my reactions changed, when my boundaries became firmer, when my tolerance for chaos decreased. That unfamiliarity felt like loss at first. But it wasn't loss. It was refinement. I wasn't becoming colder. I was becoming clearer. I wasn't becoming distant. I was becoming intentional. Keeping who I was meant staying connected to my inner compass, not my fear responses, not my trauma-driven instincts, but the part of me that knows when something feels right, the part that recognizes peace even when it feels unfamiliar, the part that understands that growth doesn't always feel comfortable, but it feels honest. Becoming someone new doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in small choices. Choosing rest over overexertion, choosing honesty over performance, choosing alignment over approval. Each choice feels minor, but together they shape a life. Together they shape a self. I learned that identity is not fixed. It's responsive. It evolves as you gain insight, as you heal, as you experience connection that doesn't demand self-erasure. And through that evolution, the core remains. The part of you that values depth, the part of you that seeks meaning, the part of you that wants to live with integrity. Becoming someone new without losing who you were means letting your past inform you, not define you. It means allowing memory without letting it dictate behavior. It means respecting the journey without staying stuck in the starting point. There's courage in allowing yourself to change publicly, in letting people see you grow in real time, in not having all the answers while still moving forward. That courage comes from self-trust. And self-trust is built by showing up for yourself consistently, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges familiar identities, even when it asks you to let go of roles you once needed to survive, even when it leads you into versions of yourself that feel quieter, steadier, more grounded, more real.